welcome to this episode of Outdoor Addictions. Keith, how are you this morning?
I'm great, man. If I was a fat tail, I'd be wagging it.
Yeah, there you go. Pull that microphone up a little closer to you. There you go.
Give me a hard take a bite out of it.
Yeah, we just finished our radio show, and so we always do this the same morning. We finish the radio show at Super Talk 102.1 FM and here in Southwest Mississippi, and then we come right over to the office and start the podcast. It'd be nice if we could do this together, but we ended up doing it separately every time. But that's okay. We get to.
We learn something. Sometimes we learn 2 or 3 things.
There you go. There you go.
Cause I might forget it between here and
I mean, just
Getting old, bro.
Yeah, we all are. That's a good problem, though. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit today about real estate, and we thought we'd devote this episode to some questions and scenarios that we as realtors experience all the time, and way too often, right?
Right.
But that's okay. That's part of our job. But what we thought we'd do is also, it's a good reminder, or these questions, these scenarios are good reminders for us as agents, but they're also a great opportunity for the public to learn something about real estate and kind of get a little insight in how this works and what's expected of not only a realtor, but what's expected from a buyer and seller as well, and what you can expect as a buyer and seller. And so let's just jump right into it. All right, Keith? All right.
Jump.
So what I'm going to do is I've got just several questions that I've actually gotten from a real estate test. So these are test questions that realtors have to pass in order to get the real estate license. And so we're going to put Keith to the test this morning and see how he does with some of these questions. So I'm going to ask a question or a scenario. I'm going to ask a question or give him a scenario, and it's going to be a choice of 4 answers. So he'll give us the best answer. Keep in mind, all of them may be right, all of them may be wrong, but what's the best answer? Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of jump into today. So, all right, first question is, Keith, whose signature is necessary for a signed offer to purchase real estate to become a contract? So let me read that again. Whose signature is necessary for a signed offer to purchase real estate to become a contract? Is it the buyer's signature only, the buyers and the sellers only, or the sellers and the seller's broker? What say you?
Well, you've got to have 2 parties to any agreement. So it's going to be buyers and sellers.
That's right.
And seller and seller's broker, the only thing you've got is you're representing.
That's right.
Somebody there. But you've got to have a buyer. You've got to have a seller.
And the reason why we want to bring this up is obviously this sounds very elementary. It really does. I mean, really, Bruce, that you brought this question up because we know the buyer and seller need to sign it. But which buyers and sellers, Keith?
Every buyer or seller. It doesn't, however many are on the deed for the property, or however many are planning on purchasing property. It may be a couple, it may just be a husband and wife. There may be 3 or 4 people going in on buying the property, but every person whose name is going to be on that title.
Yeah, whether you're a buyer, every buyer whose name's on the property has to sign to buy it. But also, and probably more frequently, is the seller. So you see this a lot when it's in an estate, or when it's owned by, let's say it's grandma and grandpa's farm.
We're not recording. Right, back up, start over.
That's fine.
Lisa said, well, I hit the start recording right here. I guess maybe I didn't hit this button. I looked down, there's all zeros up there.
Well, that's how you start it right there.
Well, you should. That's the one I clicked on, but it didn't.
So it didn't record anything?
It didn't record anything.
All right, start it over.
All right.
We'll make sure it's recording this time, though.
Yeah. Pay attention, kids. You're going to have to get another brain looking at this computer. All right, here we go. Ready? Go. It's not recording there. No.
All right, welcome to this episode of Outdoor Addictions. Hope everybody's doing well. Here it is. It's February. What is today's date, Keith? February the 6th or something like that, I think it is.
Today is the 8th.
8th. Oh, I'm 2 days
days
behind.
behind.
Oh, Lord of mercy. First week or now we're in the second week of February, I guess. But yeah, things are clicking along. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. If I was a dog, I'd be wagging my tail.
There you go. Well, that's a good thing.
You'd be beating on this wall back here.
We're going to talk a little bit today about real estate. And we thought what we do today is just, number one, we're going to check Keith's knowledge here. We're going to test him in just a minute.
Oh, Lord.
We're going to test him.
Lord.
We're going to test his knowledge as a realtor. But also, it's not, this information is not just for realtors. It's really beneficial for the public as well. So whether you find yourself as a seller of a property, whether that be a home or a tract of land, or a buyer of a property, these are things that you're going to see, run into, you may hear discussed, or you will hear discussed at some point, right? You will run into this. And so it's just a good opportunity for us to learn a little something. So we're just going to jump into it. I'm going to ask Keith some questions, and I'm going to give him 4 answers for each question. He'll give us the best answer for these, okay? And these are actually test questions that real estate agents answer to get their real estate license. So I pulled these from a study guide, which are some examples of test questions that realtors have to answer in order to get their license. But once again, it's not just good for realtors, it's good for the public too, because again, in real estate, we deal with the public all the time, right? And we want to do the right thing as agents. We want to represent people the right way. And if we can prevent any problems from happening, we want that to take place, right? We want to do what's best for everybody.
We want to be professional in all we do.
That's right. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. Keith, whose signature is necessary for a signed offer to purchase real estate to become a contract? So whose signature is necessary for a signed offer to purchase real estate to become a contract? And I'll give you 4 choices. Is it the buyer's signature? Is it the seller's signature only? In other words, is it the buyer's signature only? Is it the seller's signature only? Is it both buyer and seller's signature? Or is it the seller's and the seller's broker signature?
Well, anytime you got a contract, you got to have 2 parties involved. And so you're going to be looking at the seller and the buyer have to have a signature on.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't realize, it's not a contract till you get both of those signatures.
That's so true.
At the point the offer is presented, it is just that, an offer.
Right. And it's an offer until, so it's not a contract. And we as realtors sometimes say, I'm going to write up a contract today. No, you're not writing up a contract. You're writing up an offer. It doesn't become a contract until it's signed and everything is completed.
Agreed upon.
Agreed upon. And a contract can be verbal. It certainly can be. But in my opinion, that's not enforceable. You need it in writing. You need it in writing.
You better get it in writing.
You better get it all in writing, get everybody's signature. And when we say everybody, we mean everybody. And that's why we brought up this question, because it sounds simple enough. Well, yeah, buyer and seller need to sign it. But it's important that all buyers and sellers sign it. And give you a quick scenario. Let's say that family farm owned by parents, and the parents are deceased now, and there's 6 children. All right, 6 children inherit the family farm. And mom and daddy thought they're doing them a favor and they're going to leave them to all 6. Okay. One of those 6 has recently passed away. Okay. So what happens is their heirs could potentially inherit their portion of the family farm, which may not be something that's agreeable to the other siblings in the family. But it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
There are situations, and an attorney will help navigate through all that. But there comes a point where everybody who owns that property has to agree to sell it. And you may find a situation where someone's deceased, their children now have it, and it could be from another marriage. So in other words, they're half siblings with some other folks. You know what I mean? It's like a soap opera, man. It can get complicated real quick.
A whole other line of
That's right.
of discussion.
But now you discovered that there's another family, another sibling, another half sibling, another child of someone who now owns a percentage of that property. They have to sign the contract as well. So the person who needs to sign the contract is everybody, buyer and seller, whether there's one or 100, they have to sign it, right? And it's not done until it's done. And that's important for you, the seller, to know. So if you want to sell your property, whose ever name is on that deed is who has to agree to sell the property, right?
That's right.
If that deed has not been updated, then you probably can't sell it legally. I mean, not without clear title. You can transfer it to anybody, but you want to have clear title to it. So that, and of course, a buyer's going to want that too.
It's a difficult sale if you don't have clear title to it. If you own a property that was left to you by your family and you may be thinking about selling it, you might want to talk to an attorney.
That's right.
And see what you need to do. Make sure you do have clear title to the property, because if you don't do it now, you may have to do it later. And it's best not to do it when you're in the middle of trying to sell the property. You got a buyer for it, and then you say, "Oh, I don't have clear title. We're going to have to get it cleared." Well, you may lose that buyer in that time.
That's right. So, who signs a contract? Everybody, buyers and sellers. Multiple buyers, multiple sellers, whatever has to take place has to take place. And it's just important for you, the seller, to know that. It's important for you, the buyer, to know that. All right. Next question. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 prohibits discrimination based upon sex, race, religion, or familiar status.
Yes. All of the above.
All the above. So apparently back in 1866, Keith, not 1966, 1866, somebody had the forethought to say we need to make sure people aren't discriminated against.
What do you think about that? 1866, that was before a lot of things. You think about women's rights to vote.
Yeah. That was right after the Civil War.
Women didn't really even have a right to vote.
That's right.
For a long time. Race, early 1900, there wasn't much, but
that's right.
Realtors saw the value of what you're going to have to do.
That's right. That's right. So the Civil Rights Act of 1866 was created to state that we as the public, not just real estate agents, but the public, cannot discriminate against someone based on their sex, their race, their religion, or their familiar status, which means whether they're single or married.
Right.
You can't discriminate on any of those. Now, you can choose not to sell or rent to someone who can't get the money to buy it or rent it, right? If they're wanting to rent something and
their financial status.
Right. If they have a credit score that's terrible, and you don't have to rent it to them. That's a risk on your side to do that. You can choose not to rent it to someone, but you can't choose to not rent it to them because they have small children, or because they're of a different race or different sex or different religion than what you practice. You cannot discriminate. And it's important for sellers to know that. And this is really applies to sellers, right? It really does. Because you don't want to put yourself in a situation as a seller where you discriminate against someone. In other words, you won't sell your property to them because of something. You can't do that. When you put your property on the market, you need to be prepared to sell it to whoever can afford to buy it. I mean, if they can afford to buy it, then they should be able to buy it. Just don't put yourself in that situation.
And any realtor that has been in the business any length of time has run into that situation.
Yes.
We've had people come to us, I want to sell my house, but I want to sell it any of this race, or I don't want to sell it to a single mother, or it's got 3 or 4 children,
Right.
I don't want to rent it to a single mother that's got 3 or 4 children.
You just can't. You just got to be careful not to put yourself in those situations. And any real estate agent by law cannot discriminate. So if you are an agent and you have a property listed and the seller instructs you that you can't show it to whomever or whatever, or what, your job at that point is to say, Mr. and Miss Seller, I can no longer represent you, and I'm going to dissolve this relationship as of immediately. And that's what I advise you to do. Move on from it. Get away from it. Don't just say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, I understand, we'll do our bit. No, don't have anything to do with it. Move on. Put it behind you. And advise them, Mr. and Miss Seller, what you're doing is wrong. And you can get in serious trouble for doing that. Don't do it. Just don't do it. But again, this is something the public may not be aware of. You can't discriminate. You cannot.
I mean, you can't even take it to the level of if you get a client or someone you're showing property to, you can't steer them toward.
Yeah, I mean, it's illegal to steer them to say you need to be in this community because this great church down the road or something. I mean that's their choice where they want to go to church. I mean, just leave that alone.
Yeah.
You can't steer them something or say, I think you'll be happier in this neighborhood than that neighborhood. Well, how do you know that? What? That's not your decision to make. That's their decision to make.
That's right.
So let them. They're grown-ups. They can figure out where they want to live, where they don't want to live, and that's up to them, right? So we can't steer them in certain directions because we feel like they'll have a better fit there. Against the law to do that. All right, next question. A broker obtained a listing agreement to act as an agent in the sale of a house. So a broker obtained a listing agreement, so a broker listed a property and is acting as the agent in the sale of a house. A buyer has been found for the property and all agreements have been signed. So Keith here listed a property, a house, right? A buyer shows up, says, hey, I want to go look at it. Keith shows it to him. They're in a contract. Everything's signed. As an agent for the seller, the broker is responsible for which of the following? So in other words, all that's been done. House has been shown, it's under contract, everything's signed. What is Keith's responsibility? What is the broker, meaning the office of Keith's responsibility? And here are the choices. Completing the buyer's loan application. Ensuring that the buyer is qualified for the new mortgage loan. Making sure that the buyer receives copies of all documents the seller is required to deliver to the buyer. Or scheduling the buyer's inspection of the property. So Keith, which is your responsibility above anything else?
Well, the first two there, the completing the buyer's loan application or ensuring the buyer is qualified for a new mortgage loan. I'm not a lender. I'm not a banker.
Right.
I'm not a mortgage company. No, not that. Scheduling the buyer's inspection of the property. That's going to be up to that buyer.
Right.
To get it scheduled. So that leaves nothing but C. Making sure the buyer receives copies of all documents the seller is required to deliver to the buyer. It's my responsibility to see that any document that you sign as a buyer or seller, that you receive copies of it for you to have for your personal files. You can throw them away if you want to.
That's right. That's
but
up
I've
to
got
you.
to see that you get a copy, I keep a copy.
And there are multiple
party.
Right. And there are multiple ways of getting that to the buyer and seller. There's a program called DocuSign. There are others. DocuSign is a great way, right?
DocuSign, AuthentiSign.
That's right.
There are several.
There are tons of programs you can use to get that to them. You can simply email them a copy, right? Heck, Keith, you can print it out and drive down the road, take it to their home or business and hand it to them. But they should, all parties who signed and initialed and dated something need to have a copy of what they signed, initialed, and dated.
If I was sure I was going
First and foremost.
Going to get a listing or something, and I might take 2 copies of the listing agreement
And get them signed both.
and get them signed, both of them when we get there that way. Or the DocuSign, once you send it to them,
Yeah.
you sign
that's
your
the
part
easiest
of
way.
it, and then they get it. Once they sign it, then they can print a copy of it off and it comes back to my computer. Then I print a copy off. We've got it, and I can file it digitally in the computer as well.
And they can file it digitally as well if they so choose to do so. But the whole point is they're getting a copy of everything they signed and initialed and dated. Everything. We can help buyers obtain a loan meaning we can put them in contact with lenders. But again, they're adults, right? Everybody prefers to use a certain bank or whatever, and we can give them a list of 2 or 3 bankers, loan officers, individuals who can help them. But ultimately, it's their decision who they want to use. It's not our job to secure that for them.
Right.
Our job is to help them secure it, but ultimately, it's their job to get it. And we've had situations before where someone agreed to buy a home, all right, and they're going to secure financing, and a week goes by and you hadn't heard from them, right? So you reach out to the lender and you're like, where are we with this? I mean, the buyers, they're getting everything going. He's like, well, I hadn't heard from buyers. I've asked them to get me a copy of how much money they make, how much money they spend, and they didn't give me any of that. Well, whose fault is that? It's not ours, right? It's theirs. And then you quickly realize, well, they're not going to qualify for a loan. There's a reason why they're not getting everything to them, because it's not looking good.
And that's the reason right there we do what in the real estate business? Encourage any potential buyer to get pre-qualified.
Oh yeah, get pre-qualified beforehand. That way you don't have to worry about that embarrassment of spending the next week or 10 days jumping through the hoops and then realizing the lender tells you, Mr. and Ms. Buyer, based on your credit or based on this, that, and the other, you're not going to be able to get a loan to buy this house. That's embarrassing, right? It can be. And a lot of times the buyers are just fall out of it and you won't hear from them. But the truth is, those are things you can address before you look at the house, and that's a whole nother topic. But we always encourage buyers to get pre-approved before they start looking at homes or land or commercial businesses or whatever. Just go ahead and secure that loan, or at least get the ball rolling, right? Just you know you're pre-qualified, that if nothing changes, you can borrow up to X amount of dollars.
That's right. That's what your bank will do. They'll look at your credit
They'll
history and
what you can do.
What your income is, and versus your income versus your outgo.
That's right.
And they'll tell you what kind of property you can afford.
But again, back to the question, what's the first thing Keith does, or any broker does, or any agent does when they get a signed contract? They ensure that everyone gets a copy of everything they signed. That is the number one thing we do at that moment. Get it to them as quick as you can. That's important. It's important to do that. Next question. The state wants to acquire a strip of farmland to build a highway. Does the state have the right to acquire this land for public use? The answers are, or the choices are, yes, the state's right is called condemnation. Yes, the state's right is called eminent domain. Yes, the state's right is called escheat. Or no, under the U.S. Constitution, private property never may be taken by state or federal government. What you say, Keith?
You know, to a lot of people's chagrin, it's not deeds. Government does have a right to come in and take your property, but then we're just looking at what it's called.
Yeah. So what is it called when?
Eminent domain.
There you go, eminent domain. And that means that and of course we joke about this all the time, in our area there's potentially proposed new interstate coming through Brookhaven in southwest Mississippi. Is it Interstate 14? Is that what it is?
Something like that.
I think that's what it is. It's proposed. I don't know if it's actually been approved or not. There's talk that it has been, but I don't know that for sure.
It's been talk of it for several years, and more talk of it here recently.
Right.
But and they're also talking here. They said the Highway 80.
Right. They're going to use
corridor.
Use the Highway 84 corridor, which no doubt that makes sense. Right. Use that as much as possible. But we both know that there'll be areas where they'll get off of that because of cost-related things and the way a river crosses.
It would cost less for them to go.
Say further
2
south
or 3 miles
north.
north or south.
Yeah, and bypass
buy open land than it would to buy a property that's currently bordering the highway.
That's right.
Or whatever, businesses.
That's exactly right. So if that were to happen, of course, we see it all the time. And progress is a good thing, right? New roads are being built. I've even seen situations, and you have too, if you're listening, where the county will come in and build a new bridge. And what do they do often? They just shut down the old bridge and they shift the road either right or left and build a new bridge right beside it. And then eventually take that old bridge out and
You
it's gone.
see several of those spots along Highway 84
Right.
corridor where some of the old
That's
bridges
right.
are.
So it's really kind of funny because a year or two later, you don't even hardly remember where the old bridge was. It's gone completely. They've reconfigured the road, but that's what's happened is they've taken someone's property. They've basically contacted that landowner. Now they don't take it. Let me rephrase that. They don't take it. They buy it from you, and they quite often will pay you. Well, they will. They'll pay you fair market value. So they don't take it from you. They buy it from you, but you don't have a choice. It's what's best. It's what's in the best interest for the public. So they're going to build this new bridge, this new road, and you as the property owner will be made aware of this well in advance, sometimes years in advance before they'll actually take it or seize it. So just know that you're not going to lose it. You're actually going to make some money out of it. So, but they're not going to pay you an exorbitant. They're going to pay you fair market value, and they're going to do their research. They may have it appraised. They may talk to some real estate professionals who will advise them this property is worth X amount of dollars, and they'll try to work it out right with the landowner. They may have to pay more. They may not. I don't know, but that's something we're not involved in. But that is called eminent domain, where the government has the right to take possession of your property if it's what's best for the public at large. And of course, we see that a lot with road construction, interstates, highways, bridges, all that kind of stuff. All right, so the question is, what are those other things? Another choice was a sheet. And a sheet refers to is the right of a government to take ownership of estate assets or unclaimed property that is in the event of the property owner has no heirs or no beneficiaries. So let me say that again in another way. A sheet means when someone possibly passes away who has no heirs and no beneficiaries, right? They don't have a will. Luckily, this doesn't, at least from what I know, it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
But it can happen. And so the state could acquire that property. And that's what a sheet means. Condemnation refers to the legal acquisition of property by local government bodies such as a city or other private entities. An example of that might be the city may condemn an old home or commercial building because it may be deemed unsafe and hazardous. So you see that a lot, and we see that here in our town. It's not unique to Brookhaven. It happens all over the country, where old abandoned commercial buildings and homes are just left abandoned. The property owner may live locally, they may live out of state, and they don't improve the property. They don't clean it up, and it becomes a safety hazard for a lot of people.
It happens a lot where local family will pass away and have a property be left somebody, maybe live on the West Coast somewhere.
Right.
And these people say, I'm never moving back there.
Right. But you can't just leave a property vacant like that and be a safety hazard. So sometimes the city will step in, and they will, in some cases, they will take possession of the property. I mean, they clean it up, or they may clean it up and put a lien against the property. So in case the property owner ever sells it, then they're going to be compensated for whatever it costs to clean the lot up. So you see that a lot, and you'll see that in your local papers and news feeds where the property owners have been contacted. The city has asked them to clean it up, to tear it down, or to repair it, bring it back to its original condition. But some property owners are like, no, they just avoid it. They just don't even respond to it. Well, the city will eventually, potentially, take action.
And part of that ass can be taken over their property.
I think it certainly could be. So that's called condemnation. So, all right, one other thing.
Sheet.
Huh?
That's a sheet.
No, a sheet is when you take over, you got this backwards.
I got this backwards, don't I?
A sheet is when someone doesn't have a will and they don't have any beneficiaries or any children and the state takes over their property. In other words, they don't have a will, they're leaving it to somebody. Condemnation is what it's just like it's been condemned, right?
Am I failing the test?
Yeah, you're failing this part of the test. Condemned. The city is hazardous.
Yeah.
It's being condemned. It's being torn down.
I'm glad it doesn't happen very often.
It doesn't matter if those people doesn't have beneficiaries. They may own it completely and have heirs and have a will that says them leave somebody. It doesn't matter. They're not living up there to their end of the bargain. They're not keeping the property up. And then the city or the government agency says you got to. For the better, for everybody involved, it needs to be torn down so it's not a place for homeless people to go spend time or drug deals to take place, and it's just not safe. It makes the community, neighborhood not safe. So it's better just tear it down at that point. So the city may get involved, and that's what that's all about. All right, the last thing we want to talk about is dual agency, and we get this a lot. We talk about it a lot. So I'm going to ask Keith some scenarios. I'm going to ask him some questions and I'm going to see how well he does here.
And then, I've
We'll
been
see
doing
how
too
well
well the
you
last few minutes.
All right, Keith. Agency. Agency talks about who represents who. So let me give you a scenario. Phone rings and somebody calls you, whether it's a good friend or somebody you don't know. Say, Keith, man, I heard you a really good real estate agent. I heard you can sell the heck out of some property. I got a house I want to sell. Can you help me sell it? And Keith's like, yes, sir, I can, or yes, ma'am, I'll meet you out there and we'll go look at it. So Keith runs out there, sits at the kitchen table, has a cup of coffee and a couple of donuts and just having a good time, chit-chatting. And you get ready to list that house. What is the conversation you're going to have with that seller or that homeowner about agency?
Well, if you're going to list with me, I'm going to do everything I can to help you. I want to bring you in as a client. And as a client, I'm going to give you confidentiality. I'm going to be your fiduciary. I'm going to do everything I can to see that you get the best possible deal you can for your property.
And what Keith is saying by saying this, he's saying he's going to do it. He's saying he as a licensed realtor.
As a licensed realtor.
So this is what's required of every licensed realtor, not just Keith. But he's saying what he would do, but he's really talking about any licensed realtor.
Any licensed
realtor. Anybody. Go ahead.
Yeah. And your two options are to either come in as a client, where I'll give you these duties, or come in as a customer, where I don't owe you the confidentiality. I can talk to my clients. I can tell them, you know, yeah, well, they're wanting to buy this house and they could pay more for it than what they got. But it's a fine line there. But agency, if you hire on with me, I'm a part of United Country McDaniel-Gray Realty. You're actually hiring every agent in our office.
Right. And so that's important, and you bring up a good point. When Keith lists a property, not only does he represent the sellers as a client, I mean, you are his client, right? The minute you list it with Keith, he represents you. Not only does he represent you, the seller, but I represent you as well because I'm part of the office. We have 9 other agents. All 9 of those represent the seller just as much as Keith. That's important for you, the seller, to know that. Every agent under the umbrella of that office represents you. Now, they could represent a buyer, right, Keith?
They could.
They could. And that's where this term dual agency comes into play. And the best way I can describe dual agency is it's like a double-barrel shotgun. It's 2 barrels, equal value.
You pull both triggers, it's going to kick you.
It's going to kick you. And dual agencies sometimes can kick you right in the teeth as a seller, as a buyer, as an agent. So it's important for you to understand as a seller, you have the right to agree to participate in dual agency or not. It's your choice. And so when Keith sits down with you at your kitchen table eating those donuts and drinking that coffee, He's going to ask you, are you okay with participating in dual agency if this comes up? And he's going to explain to you what dual agency is.
And if your agent, if your client, if you don't know, ask them.
That's right. And look, it can be confusing, but the easiest way I can explain it is when you list, what you as an agent, we as an agent list a property, it's a no-brainer. That seller is our client. We represent them. That's clean. That's understandable. Where it can get hairy and get out of control is with, after Keith starts advertising it, then a good buddy of his calls him and says, Keith, man, look, and Keith knows this person, knows everything about them, knows their financial background, knows a lot of information about them, right? He may have even dealt with them before in the past. He's helped them sell a house or a tract of land or a chicken farm or whatever. So he knows them. So that buyer may roll in and say, Keith, man, I just saw where you listed this house. That's just what I've been looking for. Can you show it to me? Well, yes, sir, I can show it to you. At some point, though, if that takes place and you start showing them property, Keith, as a licensed realtor, is going to start having a conversation with that buyer and say, Mr. Ms. Buyer, what are you going to say, Keith?
This is our office's listing.
Okay.
They are a client. We represent them.
We represent them. We don't necessarily represent you, right?
Right.
So, Mr. Ms. Buyer, you have a choice. We can represent you as well, but the seller would have to agree to it. It's not just a given. Both parties have to agree to participate in what's called dual agency. Again, that dual agency means double barrel shotgun. Or the buyer can just say, I'll be a customer. And what that means is you really have no representation. You can still buy the house. Keith can still present the offer. Keith can still see at the closing. He's just honest.
Your agent,
you share all the
information fairly.
You can be treated fairly and honestly. You're going to get all the pertinent information, everything you need to know. But the truth is, Keith does not represent that buyer. He represents the seller if the buyer is what's called a customer. If you participate in dual agency, that's fine too. But there is in the state of Mississippi, it's required. Now, every state's different. But if you're listening, you live in another state, you need to check what the regulations are in your state. But in Mississippi, you have to have a form filled out that's called dual agency confirmation, which means both parties understand you as the agent have talked to them about this, and they understand that this agent represents both parties. And the truth is, Keith, they have to be reminded of that throughout the whole transaction, right? It's not just a one-time conversation. You may have to remind them, remember, I represent both, especially when they start asking personal questions about the seller. For instance, go ahead.
I'll throw one out. I have had in the past where I would be in dual agency. I went through the conversation with both parties, the seller, I represented him, we brought in buyer, and they wanted to be represented, they wanted me to represent them.
Right.
And they said, we don't care. I said, well, I've got a dual agency confirmation form, I need you to fill that out. Before we make the offer, present the offer, move forward. We did all that. When we made the offer, there was a complaint from the seller that, he didn't like the offer. Well, and rejected.
Right.
Went back to the buyer, potential buyer, and he said, well, does he have a number, a figure in mind he can get? I said, yeah, he can, but I can't tell you what that is. He has told me, but that's confidential.
You can't tell him without his permission.
Without his permission.
Right.
Now I did. He said, well, okay. But I did go back and ask.
You went back to the seller and said, Mr. Seller, is it okay for me just to tell this buyer
reveal this? Yeah.
What your bottom line is? We just cut to the chase here. And the seller said, of course.
He said, do it.
He said,
if he'll pay me that, we'll sign and we'll go on.
But the difference is you asked for permission to do it before. You just didn't volunteer because you represent that client. And he or she would be mad if they knew that you shared that information without their knowledge.
Now, on the reverse note, by me representing the buyer as well, if I had known good and well that he could pay the full price,
Yeah, like maybe he told you.
he had told me
I don't want to pay it, but I will if I have to.
I could not go back and reveal to the seller.
That's right. Because that was confidential.
Without permission.
Without permission.
So it's a double-edged sword.
So,
but we're getting all these weapons in here, aren't we?
I'm telling you. But the important thing for you as the public, you as a buyer or seller, is you need to know who represents who. And that's our job as a licensed real estate professional to explain that to you. But Keith, it can be complicated. And so if you are a buyer and seller, if you find yourself as a buyer and seller, and even after you're in the middle of the process, you're like, explain that again to me now. How does that work? Well, then we'll explain it. We want you to understand who represents who, because that is the number one issue with people getting sued, whether you're in real estate or if you're a seller or a buyer or whatever. Just understand who represents who, and then usually everything's fine. People understand. Okay, the agent represents the buyer, represents the seller too. Let's just work it out. Let's just see. Like you said, if you present an offer to the seller and the seller says, Keith, will the buyer pay more money? Well, you may know that. They may have told you that in your vehicle just a few minutes ago when y'all wrote the offer, right? You tell the seller, I can't tell you, sir, or ma'am, I can't tell you. What do you want to do? Here's the offer. Make a counter offer. Or accept it or reject it. What do you want to do? It's your decision. You see what I mean? In the same token, you go back to the buyer, and the buyer's like, man, I sure hoping they come down that price. Will they take less money, Keith? Like you said, you may know, but you can't say it. So all you can say is, Mr. Buyer, Mr. and Miss Buyer, look, what do y'all want to do? We talked about this, right? I can't share that. Here's the offer. Here's the counter offer. What do you want to do? Let's go to the next step. You'll know their answer based on how they react to your offer. So I encourage you to make any offer, any counter offer, and just keep going until it works out or it doesn't work out. But it's important for you to know that we as licensed real estate agents are going to let that play out. It's not our decision who sells for what or who pays for what. It's your decision as the client, whether you're the seller or whether you're the buyer. If you're the buyer, you got a dollar amount you want to go up to. If you're the seller, you got a dollar amount you'll go down to. And hopefully the two parties agree. But if they don't, then we all go about our merry way and we'll go find another property, right?
Right.
Or if you're a seller, we'll go find another buyer. And we just move on.
And in all honesty, this is probably as clear as mud to anybody that's listening to this. But there are a lot of realtors out there that do not have a hard time grasping this concept.
Absolutely. And it's embarrassing to say that, but it is true. And this is a hard concept. But we as licensed professionals are required to understand the difference. And so we're going to do our best to explain it to you. We want you to understand the ins and outs of real estate so that you can make informed decisions that's best for you and your family. But at the same time, you as the buyer and seller want to stay out of legal trouble too. So
right.
You don't want to do something that you'll likely regret down the road. So that's part of our job as well, is to help navigate through this process, and that's what this whole thing is. So part of our big responsibilities as real estate professionals is to explain agency. And again, you're either a client, you're a customer, or you participate in dual agency. And those are the choices. That's it. It's those three choices right there. And we're going to do our best to explain it to you. So if you contact any licensed realtor, they're required to have those conversations. So it's not just unique to us, Keith and I. This is everybody. And so if you're a buyer or seller, and if you're thinking about selling your property, these are terms you need to be familiar with. And you need someone to understand so you can make good decisions.
And we hope we cleared the air with this.
And I'm sure we didn't. But that's okay. you know,
If-
it's just a learning process for all
If you
involved.
get ready to buy or sell,
We'll explain
your
it to you.
agent should be explaining it to
It
you.
should be explained to you. And if they can't explain it, then I suggest you go find another real estate agent. That's what I suggest. So anyway, all right. Anything else, Keith, you can think of?
Oh, my head hurts now. It made me do all this thinking.
Keith, I gotta tell this story. I gotta put Keith on the spot. Last week was it last week or was it 2 weeks ago? It was last week, wasn't it? We had a guest in here from out of town, 2 guests actually. Our previous podcast. Had them in here, recorded our podcast, and we're using a different program now to upload our podcast than what we were.
This
So we're
one
still,
right here.
we're still learning as we go. But Keith here, old buddy, old pal, last week accidentally deleted that darn podcast. Remember that, Keith? Remember that day? Remember
How could I forget that? I sit here for 4 hours trying to get that back.
We were in the process of recording a little intro to add to it, and it was just accident, complete accident, deleted it. And we spent the rest of the day chatting with somebody, right, on this site, which was he or she, or I think it was multiple people before the day was over with.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't just one person.
I'd have to get out. And,
Got to get back in it and had to talk to somebody else, and they had to catch up on the history and all that. But anyway, over the course of a few hours, and I do mean hours, we got it back.
it was about 4 hours.
We got it back, man. And we were both rejoicing and thanking the good Lord above.
And I slept good that night.
So technology is a wonderful thing.
Till it's not.
Until it's not. So
Till you get a dummy on the button and
it's
clicking the wrong button.
You're not a dummy anymore because you learned a lot. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about you that day.
Uh-oh.
It's a good thing. At one point, I was like, Keith just builds character. And he's like, I could just put you in a darn headlock right now. Like, look on the bright side. We're building character at the moment. We're going through adversity. It's okay.
I'm wanting to get you a headlock again right now.
All right. Until next time, stay addicted
to the outdoors.
All right.
About 40 minutes.
You remember how to share it?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Don't delete it.
Okay, we use it.
Let's play it, see if we can hear it. Go back. Just go back that little arrow there. No, go back over there. Push that arrow, yeah.
Ran to a slight problem. Try again to refresh the page.
Yep. Let's press play. All right, welcome to this episode of Outdoor Addictions. Hope everybody's doing well. Here it is.
Take 2.
See, it's February. What is today's date, Keith? February the 6th or something like that? I think it is.
It is the 8th.
8th. Oh, I'm 2 days behind. Oh, Lord have mercy. First week in February, or now we're in the second week of February, I guess. But yeah, things are